You know that feeling? Sega releases a new Sonic collection for the current console generation. You play the Mega Drive games as you always do, and then you put it back into your collection next to all the other ones. This is how my experience with these collections usually goes, but way at the bottom of the barrel you will always find these. The 12 Sonic games for the Sega Game Gear. But does anyone ever actually play these? Sega will throw these after you for any purchase. You look at them and think, cool, and then you go back to playing Sonic 3 and Knuckles like a normal person. But after my Sonic marathon I had the perplexing notion of, what if I started these up? These are Sonic games, why did I never play these? So, I did. I played every Sonic game on the Sega Game Gear, and this is what I think. Sonic the Hedgehog on the Game Gear is an 8-bit reimagining of the original Sonic the Hedgehog game. To my personal surprise, for an early 90s handheld platformer, it was a whole lot of fun. Its speed and physics were nearly as good as the Mega Drive counterpart, apart from a few slowdowns here and there that only occur when there's a lot going on. It's a pretty worthy companion piece with a few changes here and there. The game has 6 zones with 3 acts each. 3 of the zones are the same as the 16-bit game, the other 3 are decent new additions, namely the bridge and jungle zones, which aren't too crazy, but I like the diversified platforms in Jungle Zone. And the new final zone Skybase, which is like a proto-wing fortress and to my surprise came after Scrub Rain. There's this little world map between levels that show you the way you traverse the world, which I think is really cool. The third act of each zone is entirely devoid of rings and is just a boss fight, most of which are laughably simple, but considering the console version's bosses of the first game were as well, I don't think this is very surprising nor bad. Being forced to fight the bosses with no extra health is an interesting enough challenge, making them not too easy. All in all, it's simple, pure fun, and honestly a decent alternative to the 16-bit game. If you like the Mega Drive games and always wanted more, give this one a try. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is the direct sequel to Sonic 1 for the Game Gear. It features mostly the same feeling of gameplay and reuses a lot of assets. Its main difference lies in the level design and the quality of it. Strangely, it's barely an adaptation of Sonic 2 for the Sega Genesis, and more of an original sequel to the 8-bit Sonic 1. This game works basically the same as Sonic 1, just with a few new things. It focuses a lot more on brand new zones, introducing these pipe mechanics for example, and they're just the worst thing ever. Every platformer after this one has one of these pipe maze levels, that are some of the worst levels in these games. It also has a couple of situational gimmicks like these gliders in the Sky High zone that barely work, or these bubbles that later came back in Sonic Mania. The boss fights are a lot more varied than in its predecessor, fighting other bosses instead of just Dr. Robotnik, but they're ridiculously hard at times. The first boss took me multiple retries because of how tight this reaction time is. I like this pig guy at the end of the Green Hill Zone. And yes, the Sonic 2 has a Green Hill Zone, and also it's the 4th zone in the game. Crazy. One of the last bosses is against Silver Sonic. One of the first ever Badniks meant to rival Sonic, which is pretty neat. He also came back in Sonic Mania in the Metal Sonic boss fight. As much as I loved Sonic 1, it disappoints me to say that this game is endlessly more frustrating. Spike traps, death pits and other hazards are placed just off screen everywhere. You run into enemies all the time and some of the level gimmicks just aren't very fun. Sonic 2 is a bit of a downgrade to Sonic 1, mostly because the level design is needlessly more difficult. It's unfair at times and simply not as good as the first one. Sonic Chaos is the third game on the Game Gear and also a traditional Sonic platformer. Sonic Chaos' biggest difference is that it's a whole lot easier and shorter than the previous two games. Not that the other games are significantly longer, most games on this list are about an hour long, but I've beaten Sonic Chaos in less than 40 minutes. The platforming and difficulty was turned down by a lot. It introduces power-ups like these rocket boots that let you fly all over the place, or the spring shoes that let you bounce all over the place. The game also has a green hill zone, but this time it's roboticized. You go through the stage in like 5 minutes, and yet this change of the environment stuck with me more than what Sonic Forces did to this world. The final boss was a pretty standout moment of the game for me. You see it's Dr. Robotnik in his tin can on chicken legs, and he shoots bouncing projectiles all over the place that just hits you sooner or later. Until I learned you can go through his legs and you just go in circles around him. It took me a while to figure him out, but once I did, he just turned into a very satisfying encounter. Sonic Chaos is better than Sonic 2 was in my opinion, mostly because it wasn't as annoying to play, but it doesn't really quite at the quality that Sonic 1 had either. It's a pretty decent Sonic game, but nothing too special either. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is Puyo Puyo. Have you played Puyo Puyo? Then you know how to play this game. It's just Puyo Puyo. This is basically how Puyo Puyo came to the West. When it released in Japan, they didn't really want to localize it here because they were afraid it was too weird or something. I don't know. So they just put the characters from the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon in this and just call it a day. Have you played Puyo Puyo Tetris? It's pretty good. It is just the same thing. I like the art style, I suppose. I like the little portraits of the characters. I never watched Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, but you know, it's pretty funny. The music is fine. It has a story, something about beans, I think. It's Puyo Puyo. If you like Puyo Puyo, you can play this, but why would you if there's Puyo Puyo Tetris? Like, come on, just play it on a Switch. It's just Puyo Puyo. It was fine. Played for like 30 minutes. Yeah. If you made it this far into the video, why not consider liking and subscribing? I put a decent amount of effort in this video, but I don't really know what to say about this game, so yeah, it's Puyo Puyo. It's pretty good. Sonic Drift is a simple racing game, quite similar to Super Mario Kart. You can play as Sonic, Tails, Amy and Dr. Robotnik. There's 3 cups with 6 races each, all being based on the zones from Sonic 1. Playing through all races doesn't take very long, about 30 minutes or so, and there's very little content outside of that. So the question of course is, how good are those 30 minutes worth of gameplay? Well, at the beginning I thought this game was nearly unplayable, as did everyone who played it for the first time. Going around the corners is not exactly intuitive. The drift button is quite sensitive. You're not supposed to press it down like in Mario Kart. The secret is to just nudge the drift just a little bit. You wanna press it repeatedly when going around corners and not hold it down. Once you get the hang of it, it becomes a non-issue. It's not like that's the only problem though. You can't just overtake the enemy racers just like that, since they take up like a third of the raceway. The sight into the distance isn't good either, and although the turns are announced by these arrows, often they're announced way too late. But for those times you also have this map in case you hadn't noticed it yet, but I won't blame you if you did. It only takes up 80% of the screen. You also have items that lie around on the racetrack. Invincibility, speed and jump. You use them immediately upon picking them up. They can be useful and add a bit of fizz, but you don't have the variety or tactical use as in Mario Kart games. But even cooler are the special abilities. You can collect rings in the courses and use them to perform character specific abilities. Sonic can use a dash, Robotnik a mine, and so on. These are pretty cool, but Sonic's is by far the best one in my opinion. Combining the screen crunch, short sight and biggest map in racers is not exactly the most pleasant experience, but in my opinion once you get decent at it, it can be a decent amount of fun. Would I play it on my free time? No, not a chance. Did I have fun while sitting down and playing it? I did. Luckily a certain game took this and made a much better sequel out of it. Sonic Spinball is a game I was quite afraid of playing. If you've seen my playthroughs of any Sonic games, you'll know that the pinball and casino areas of Sonic games are rarely liked by me, so I was expecting this to be the full stop worst experience in the world. But to my big surprise, this is by far the best pinball gameplay you find in the Sonic series. That doesn't have to mean much, but let me explain. Sonic Spinball is a spin-off in which Sonic takes the role of the ball in a pinball table. You can walk and jump around like him, destroy enemies and such, but most of the focus lies on traversing the stage with help of the various bumpers. There's 4 stages, and you have to collect all 3 to 5 emeralds in the area to proceed to the boss fight. The bosses here being nothing too special. There's a lot of slowdowns when more than 2 things are happening at once, and the screen crunch isn't ideal. Each stage takes maybe 15 minutes at most. I found the game as a whole to be quite fun though. There's also special stages, but they were kind of boring and nothing too important. I think they're just there to heighten the score, so nothing too crazy. I liked exploring the levels. They're tightly designed and compact, having a middle, left and right path that are all cleverly interconnected so that you actually feel like exploring the open area, and being able to actually control the ball makes any pinball machine better. I played the Genesis version a bit before, but I never got the hang of it, so I'm quite surprised I enjoyed my time with the Game Gear version this much. Sonic Triple Trouble is probably the most well-known Sonic game on the system. It stands out by being of actual quality. It's a continuation of the 2D platformers after Sonic Chaos, but the game looks heaps better than its predecessors and has little more focus on telling an in-game story. The title Triple Trouble refers to the 3 antagonists, Dr. Robotnik, Knuckles and newly introduced Fang the Sniper, a treasure hunter slash bounty hunter that became a bit of a mainstay of Sonic throughout the 90s. Then disappeared for a few years and has since gained a bit of a resurgence in the past few years. I don't have much to say about it. You could write it off as just another Sonic platformer, but this one is by far the best one on the system. The level design is fantastic, and occasionally the game will have a lot more dynamic moments and act transitions, like the finale of Sunset Park Zone, how you run into the sign at the end of Act 2 and immediately the train starts moving and you directly go into the boss fight. The bosses in this game aren't the highlights of this game, but there's some cool encounters against Knuckles and Metal Sonic. In this game only, you can attack mid-air after you jump from a spring, which is necessary to fight some bosses or continue a stage, which is interesting enough to mention I suppose. The power-ups from Sonic Chaos are also back, newly introducing the Snowbot in the Robotnik Winter Zone, which by the way, fun fact, in Japan the Doctor was always called Eggman and was renamed Robotnik in the West, with these 2 differing names being fused in the adventure games, but it's in this game that the term Robotnik was first used in Japan. There's a 16-bit fan remake of Triple Trouble that is on par with some of the best Sonic games in my opinion. If you wanna check out Triple Trouble, I suggest you try out that one. Sonic Drift 2 irons out basically every problem I had with Sonic Drift 1. It has more characters this time, adding Knuckles, Fang and Metal Sonic to the roster. Its core gameplay is still the same, but the courses are now much more detailed and varied. Again, there are 3 cups with 6 races each. Some courses based on Sonic 2's and 3 stages, but also featuring a bunch of original places. The courses are more detailed and generally longer this time. Some most original gimmicks like these half-pipes in the desert road and ice cap, a lightning storm in a jungle or underground tracks and tunnels, with one even having earthquakes. Quite a few tracks aren't even round based and only a race from A to B, which is quite a cool way to change things up. This time you have items that you can use whenever you want, like spike bolts akin to the bananas from Mario Kart, and the characters with special abilities are back as well. The game even features a finale of sorts, with the second to last race in the final cup being a race to the death egg, and the final race being inside of the death egg. The main issue being the distance of sight is still present, and in some cases I think the arrows telling you when your turn is coming up are now much harder to see, but that may have been a me issue. The main thing I like about this game are the tracks. They show much more character and variety and a lot more memorable than in the first game. Some of these were really standout moments in my opinion. All in all, this is clearly a much better package than Drift 1. It's only marginally longer, but the 30 minutes it takes to play through it is quite fun. If you've already got a hang of the drifting mechanic that is, which is still quite difficult as explained in the Drift 1 segment. Tails Sky Patrol is the very first starring game of Tails the Fox, a quaint little on-rails shooter exclusive for the Game Gear. You play as Tails, flying from left to right. Your only way to interact with the surroundings is your ring. It's also your only means to attack. You can fling it, either at enemies or interactable objects like minecarts, balloons or weights. Throughout the levels you also have to collect candies as fuel, because otherwise Tails will get hungry and die. The game is quite short, only having 5 stages, and that's including the tutorial area. To make up for that fact, the game can be quite punishing. The enemies technically don't harm you, but if you get hit by an enemy, Tails will spiral out of control. If that happens, you have a small chance to catch yourself, but if you don't, Tails will die if he hits anything. The gameplay and presentation are quite nice for what they are in my opinion, and the ring attachment mechanic is pretty creative. The longer the game went on and the more I got used to the mechanics, the more I liked it. It's a pretty cool little game, it works well for what it wants to be. The main villain of this game is Witchcard, the wicked witch of the minecart, and her gang. The characters never came back again, so there isn't too much to say about them. The boss fights were pretty funny I guess though. You have to catch them with your ring and then slam them into walls, so that's pretty funny. Tails' Adventure, however, is Tails' final ever starring role to date. In contrast to every other Sonic game, this is a Metroidvania of sorts, split into levels. There's a level select screen, but apart from that this is a fully fledged open world collectathon. There's upgrades and various exits to find in the levels that will help you or lead to new areas. The problem is that this game suffers from a lot of limitations that drag down the experience by a lot. Firstly, you can only ever carry 4 of your items at once into a level. The issue here being, since you can't know which exact upgrades you need, it becomes total blind luck. There's a few upgrades you pretty much need always, like the remote robot or bomb, but often you're gonna stand in front of an obstacle that you can't progress through. If that happens, you're gonna have to exit the level, manually. There is no quick way to get back into the world map. You walk back to the beginning of the level, change your items to the ones you need and go all the way back. The levels are quite short generally, but it does still get annoying. Halfway through the game or so, progression can also become a bit unclear, since some levels don't even have a proper exit. You go in, grab the upgrades and go back to the beginning, which confuses me a bit. Tails himself is also quite slow, which doesn't aid the backtracking, being a bit of a pain, but you can circumvent it by using the Sonic upgrade, which lets you use the spin dash from the mainline Sonic games, which I thought was really fun but only found out about it by the end of the game. The story of the game is that an armada of birds known as the Battle Cuckoo Empire invades Cocoa Island to gather the Chaos Emeralds that are here now for some reason. But Tails, residing here now for some reason, opposes them with a hefty arsenal of missiles, napalm and various other explosives. Tails packs one hell of an arsenal in this game. I like the story for what it is, and the Cuckoos make for interesting enough characters. More interesting than Witchcard from Tails Sky Patrol, at the very least. There are some cool boss fights against the High Command throughout the game. One of which I was convinced was sort of a beta appearance of Bean the Dynamite, who first appeared 1 year later in Sonic the Fighters. Turns out it's actually Battle Cuckoo the 16th. His boss fight is a race of sorts to the top of the course. Another boss against a mad scientist called Dr. Fukurokov sees yourself being locked in a piece of machinery meant to kill you. You have to use the remote robot to go through it and drop a rock on his head, which I think was hilarious. The final boss against Great Battle Cuckoo, yes that's his name, the leader and seemingly dictator of the Cuckoo Empire, was also pretty challenging and cool. In the end the game can be quite fun, but I would argue it's best played with a guide and save states, just to save yourself from a bunch of headaches. It was also much longer than any other Game Gear game, clocking in at about 3 hours or so. Sonic Labyrinth is a spin-off not unlike Sonic 3D Blast on the Mega Drive. It's an isometric puzzle platformer in which you run around these courses and have to gather 3 keys hidden throughout the level, either carried by enemies or just laying around somewhere, and then find the exit door. Sonic is quite slow in this game, which urges you to use the spin dash as your main means of traversal, which in turn makes the game become a bit of a ricocheting headache. It can be mastered though. If you get the hang of it, it actually controls quite well in my opinion. The game isn't that difficult. For a game called Sonic Labyrinth, the levels are pretty straightforward for the most part. I actually really enjoyed the more explorative gameplay. The enemies can actively harm you either, If you get hit, you simply lose the keys you've collected so far, as if they're the rings of this game. The bosses are pretty easy as well, since you're able to attack in quick succession, they don't stand a chance. I think this was one of my favorite games on this device, mostly because it was something new, but I also really like the creativity seen in this game. Except that bit with that stupid platform that you only see if you stand on this random ledge for no reason until it suddenly appears. God fucking off. Sonic Blast is a 3D style 2D platformer a la Donkey Kong Country and the grand finale of Sonic on the Game Gear. Except that it's slow, poorly designed and ugly as all hell. I mean, just look at it. Look at it! It tried to be cool but utterly and completely failed, but just because it's ugly doesn't mean it has to be bad. It's also bad. The game plays about as smoothly as it looks. It's the game in which Sonic factually moves the slowest. It plays as if you're underwater constantly, so don't even get me started on the underwater levels. It also has its fair share of bugs. I couldn't go through the very first loop-to-loop with a spin dash, which gave me heavy flashbacks of Sonic Heroes. Most of the level design isn't very interesting, barely any interesting set pieces or gimmicks, and the ones that exist are annoying and confusing. You do have a double jump as Sonic for some reason, which changes things up just a little bit. As every other Sonic Game Gear game, it's pretty short. It only features 5 zones, with the 4th zone being about as long as the first 3 combined. It's the tried and true pipe maze level of this game and it's the worst one by far. There's currents and shit everywhere and it's just... The final zone also isn't very good. It's convoluted and confusing as hell. All the zones, by the way, are named after the color and place convention a la Green Hill. So additionally you have Yellow Desert, Red Volcano, Blue Marine and Silver Castle. These zones show about as much character as their names suggest. The Game Gear has Sonic 1 and 2, Triple Trouble is kind of like the Game Gear Sonic 3, so this game in a way is a reimagining of Sonic and Knuckles. Just like in that game you can even play as him. Some of the boss fights are pretty interesting in my opinion. The designs are pretty cool sometimes, and I like the fact that the herb boxes are the windshield specifically. I don't know, it changes things up from other games I guess. The final boss is a pretty cool idea. He fires at you with a laser which you can redirect with a mirror. You're standing on a wheel that changes the position of it so that you can reflect it back to Robotnik. It gets bogged down by screen crunch, being very gimmicky, and going on for way too long. At the end of the day, this game is probably the weakest one on the Game Gear. At the very least it's the weakest of the 2D platformers. The visuals can be kind of endearing if you appreciate what they were trying to do, but this game is as well designed as it looks. I mean, just look at it. And these were my 12 days of Game Gear Christmas. I actually had a bit of a blast playing through them. I've seen them before in all kinds of collections and stuff, but I never bothered to play them since I always bought them off as lesser. But for the most part I really like the Sonic games for the Game Gear. To be fair, I am glad to have committed to them now that I'm older. I think younger me simply couldn't appreciate them for what they are. But nevertheless I did it. This was the second part of my journey through the Sonic franchise. Next year I'll start a run of all the Evermania games that I missed last time. Tomorrow Sonic the Movie 3 should come out in the cinema, so I'll be excited to watch it. I hope you'll also enjoy the new movie. I urge you to try some of the games I just talked about and I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Good night.